The spiritual journey rarely ends at the moment of awakening. It only begins to reveal new challenges and mysteries. After a profound mystical experience, many of us feel that we have touched a greater dimension of existence. We quickly realize that integrating this expansion into everyday life is a delicate process filled with paradoxes. Inspired by the teachings of Alan Watts, this video explores the dilemmas and difficulties that arise after spiritual awakening, showing that true transformation does not lie in controlling emotions or maintaining elevated states, but in welcoming the flow of life with presence, humility, and authenticity. In this space, we will explore how to balance the mystery of awakening with the demands of real life without losing our center, and how to transform the integration of these experiences into a path of freedom and inner peace. After experiencing my deepest mystical experiences, I faced a new challenge: how to integrate all this expansion of consciousness into my daily life without losing emotional or psychological control. I remembered the words of Alan Watts, who teaches that these spiritual experiences reveal that I am, in essence, a temporary expression of the cosmos, not just a separate identity trying to control everything at any cost. For me, integrating awakening means abandoning the old desire for control and embracing the reality of the present, accepting all emotions, the ups and downs, without running away from what I really am. Watts said, "Mystical experiences show me that I am the universe experiencing itself. There is no separate self trying to direct life. I am part of the flow." This inspires me to realize that the secret lies in participating in this flow, fully accepting today. There's something Alan Watts emphasized. Said, "The true danger of post-awakening is believing that happiness and peace are somewhere idealized in the future. Happiness can never be found in some tomorrow, because it is in the present, and only in the present, that one lives," he said. With this, I understood that seeking to cling to the spiritual ecstasy experienced or trying to manipulate the revelations of awakening can create even more internal fragmentation. The path lies in relaxing deeply, recognizing that there is no absolute control, only the chance to consciously participate in the mystery of existence, thus accepting each emotion and vulnerability. I surrendered to the real journey of integration, building an authentic and transformative spirituality. After all, as Watts reminds us, my freedom is only born when I stop manipulating the process and surrender, moment by moment, to what I am, an awakened consciousness navigating the ocean of existence. I also realize, as Alan Watts warns, that there is a curious paradox when I try to relive or repeat intense mystical experiences. The more I seek to hold on to that state, the more anxiety and frustration I create within myself. Watts said that every effort to hold on to or repeat a spiritual experience generates anxiety, because the very act of seeking is a departure from the present. This led me to understand that integrating spiritual awakening is not about controlling emotions or guaranteeing a constant state of enlightenment, but rather about fully participating in the flow of life, welcoming everything that arises without resistance or judgment. Deep down, Alan Watts suggests that instead of seeking eternal ecstasy or trying to control the lessons received, the teaching lies in cultivating an attitude of wonder and humility before the mystery of now. By practicing this surrender, I stop fighting against my own humanity and accept that each emotion and each challenge are part of the experience of being alive and awake. I realize, then, that authentic freedom and peace arise when I stop manipulating the internal process and simply allow myself to be. So Watts teaches, my true integration begins when I embrace the unknown. I am an awakened consciousness navigating, without maps, the vast ocean of existence. In the midst of this journey, I recognize how easy it is to fall into the trap of trying to transform spiritual awakening into a goal to be achieved or a permanent state to be maintained. Alan Watts always emphasized that control is an illusion created by the ego, and that true wisdom arises when I accept my vulnerability and impermanence. He taught that sanity lies in recognizing that we have no control. We only participate in the great flow, and this echoes in me every time I try to shape my experiences to fit a fixed idea of spirituality. Therefore, each time insecurity or fear of the unknown arises, I try to remember Watt's invitation to relax in the present and gently observe everything that manifests in my mind and in my heart. I see, now, that integrating mystical experiences doesn't require eliminating doubts or pains, but learning to live with them and transform them into fuel for self-understanding and compassion. When I connect with the idea that I am an inseparable part of the universe, I understand that there is no need to conquer control, because true integration happens in a trust and surrender to uncertainty where everything begins to make sense within the greater flow of existence. I realize how the post-awakening phase is a journey filled with nuances and inner challenges. Since I first experienced my mystical moments, it was inevitable that a deep sense of connection and transcendence would take hold of me. But over time, I discovered that these sensations, as elevated as they were, did not instantly resolve my emotional conflicts or human insecurities. Alan Watts had always warned me about this paradox. Just because I had a glimpse of the infinite didn't mean that, overnight, all my fears and anxieties would vanish. In fact, many times they even intensified, becoming more visible under the light of this new awareness. I began to understand that integrating these experiences is not about escaping my humanity, but diving into it with a more compassionate gaze, accepting vulnerability as an inseparable part of the process. In daily life, integrating awakening became an exercise in radical humility. I discovered that I don't need to reject anger, jealousy, sadness, or confusion feelings I had often tried to avoid by seeking refuge solely in the mystical dimension. Over time, I realized that, as Watts used to say, trying to maintain only elevated states is a subtle form of resistance. The effort to hold on to a state of ecstasy is, paradoxically, the root of suffering. When I began allowing all parts of myself to have space to exist, I naturally felt more inner lightness. I used the clarity provided by deep experiences to illuminate the shadows that had previously been ignored, and in doing so, I started to understand the true meaning of integration. It is not about excluding anything, but about welcoming everything, even what my mind would prefer to hide. In my inner dialogues, I often find myself trying to understand what the next step is. And again, Alan Watts appears in my memory. He would say that the secret lies in reverent awe before the mystery, not in the search for final answers. So, whenever I feel the urge to control my experiences or force meanings, I remember that true freedom emerges when I fully accept the uncertainty of the present moment. I began practicing moments of silence, simply observing the flow of thoughts and feelings without judgment. In these moments, I notice how the attempt to manipulate the spiritual process is a constant source of tension, while surrender, on the other hand, brings me the peace I have long sought. It's not that the challenges disappear, but by opening myself to the unknown, I discover new ways of seeing myself and the world with more gentleness and less self-imposed pressure. Looking back, I see that integrating spiritual awakening is an ongoing invitation to abandon old certainties. At every moment, I am called to recognize that, although I cannot control everything, I can choose honesty with myself and the courage to live with an open heart. Alan Watts spoke about this radical transparency before existence, defending the idea that our greatest lessons reveal themselves precisely in the moments when we finally admit that we dare to know. We don't have control, and yet we continue participating attentive and engaged with life. In the end, the true meaning of my awakening is found in accepting my inner tides, floating with them, knowing that I am, simultaneously, a part and an expression of this vast ocean called the human experience. And this realization, simple as it may be, is deeply liberating. A constant reminder that I don't need to attain any extraordinary state to be fully real, whole, and present, here and now. As I continue walking this path of integration, I notice that spiritual awakening, contrary to what many imagine, is not limited to moments of constant ecstasy. On the contrary, as Alan Watts always emphasized, each intense mystical experience ends up highlighting what I still need to look at within myself: old wounds, unresolved emotions, and deeply rooted conditionings. When the veil of everyday life falls back after an awakening, the challenge becomes how to live with authenticity without denying any aspect of my humanity. I came to understand that enlightenment is not about being immune to pain or fear, but about being able to welcome, with presence and awareness, everything that is part of the experience of being alive. This acceptance is not passive. It is an active willingness to look at oneself without masks, breaking the cycle of seeking refuge only in the comfort of what is pleasant or elevated. On days when I feel I'm losing myself in these searches, I turn to Alan Watts' teachings to find my center again. He said that life is like music. It is not made only to be resolved or controlled, but to be appreciated in each note, including the dissonant ones. By bringing this principle into my daily life, I perceive the value of silence, contemplation, and humility before everything I don't understand. When I stop demanding answers, a space is created within me where authenticity can flourish. I learn to respect the timing of my own transformations without rushing or judging my falls, because even they are part of the natural flow of existence. Increasingly, I feel that my spiritual integration is not a distant goal, but a continuous process full of unpredictable movements, like the waves of the sea. And so, with each new wave, I discover that living awake is, above all, allowing oneself to be traversed by life in all its depth and mystery. Following the path of spiritual awakening has revealed itself to me as a vast, profound experience filled with challenges that go far beyond the simple occurrence of mystical moments. Alan Watts taught me that awakening is not just a light that switches on, but a process of relinquishing the illusions of control and ego, revealing a deeper and broader reality. He said that the separate self is a hallucination, a cultural myth we learned so thoroughly that we turned it into our identity. This realization was liberating. I understood that I am not an isolated entity trying to steer life, but part of the very flow of the universe, a temporary expression of the moving cosmos. This led me to question the constant need to control my emotions and experiences, realizing that the true integration of awakening lies in relaxing into the current of existence and accepting the full range of feelings that arise without resisting them. Watts clearly stated that spiritual awakening is not a static state of enlightenment, but a dynamic process in which we often become an uncomfortable mirror for those still trapped in their own illusions and social masks. As I become more present and authentic, I notice that my silence and inner peace can unsettle the egos of others, for such authenticity exposes old wounds and disguises. He said that awakening is stopping taking the ego game seriously, and that this is a supreme heresy to the temple of the ego. For me, this means that my greatest power does not lie in arguments or explanations, but in simply existing faithfully as I am, without the need to convince or prove anything to anyone. Thus, I have learned that my awakened light is a silent invitation, a reminder of the freedom available to those who allow themselves to shed old identities and give themselves space to simply be with imperfections, doubts, and vulnerabilities. This is the kind of force that transforms quietly, for it does not shout to impose itself, it simply is, and by being, it disarms and invites. This path has also taught me to live with the paradox of spiritual seeking. The effort to hold on to or repeat a state of enlightenment or ecstasy only generates anxiety and further internal fragmentation. Watts was clear in saying that true awakening is an emptying of the character, a kind of death and rebirth, to integrate my experiences. I understood that I must abandon the illusion of control and accept that transformation happens at the pace of the unknown. I open myself to each emotion, each shadow, and each challenge as part of the natural process of dance between light and darkness that makes me more whole. realizing that I am the space through which everything comes and goes, that I am not my emotions, but the observer of them, brought me deep relief. Alan Watts said that it is possible to be sad without being sadness, to feel fear without being fear. For there is a conscious space that welcomes all of this without attachment or resistance. In the silence of this surrender, discover what Watts called presence, a state that does not need to justify or assert itself, but which is profoundly transformative because it reveals the truth beyond ego, that freedom and peace are not consequences of mastering or understanding everything, but of the radical and continuous acceptance of what one is, here and now, with all its beauty and imperfection. To live awakened, for me, is to navigate this vast ocean of existence with humility, curiosity, and courage, aware that I do not know, that I do not control, but that I can be present and real. Caught. This is my true integration, the daily invitation to renounce false certainties and embrace the mystery of life, allowing my consciousness to flow freely in harmony with the infinite that lives within me.